So this lesson is an introduction to the basic definitions and notations that we use in geometry. And I say the basic notations and definitions because there are really only four things that we're talking about here. And in order to talk about anything else that we're going to go through in our geometry units, we have to know these four things. And you may have heard these words before, but still, take notes in your notebook when you see the definitions come up, and we're also going to talk about how we write them down and represent them when we're not just drawing them. So the four things that we're talking about are a point, a ray, a line, and a plane. And we're going to start with a plane because the idea of a plane is extremely important. It's a flat surface that extends forever in all directions. It's as if you took the surface of the computer screen that you're watching now, which we'll assume is more or less perfectly flat, and you extended it forever in every direction, up, down, left, right, diagonally, everything, so that it truly had no end and went on forever. And we're perfectly flat. Most of what we talk about in geometry, or at least the type of geometry that we're going to do now, is based on this flat surface called a plane. As soon as we go into 3 dimensions, we'll have to add a height, and then we're just in what we call a generic space. But to start off with, we're going to start off in 2 dimensions, and that is called a plane. Within planes exist these things called points, which is a single specific location on a plane. So if you didn't get a chance before to pause the video and write down the definition of a plane, here it is now. Go ahead, pause the video and write that down. And then I'll keep talking here about a point. Pause the video at any point where that seems good for you to write this down, but I'll give you another chance again once we talk about this. So a point is a single specific location on a plane. And while the point that we're looking at here, this little black dot, which is how it's represented visually when we draw it, it's actually even smaller than that. You wouldn't be able to see an actual point no matter how much you zoomed in because it's one small location on a plane, and that dot actually covers an area. It's a mini circle, but we use a dot to represent a plane and represent a point. And when we talk about points, we write them using a single capital letter. So we, for example, could name this point A, and that would be point A. We could have another point over here that we name C, for example, and maybe it's another point here that we name G. So 2 important things to remember about points. One, that they're designated by capital letters. Extremely important that these points are by capital letters. That's how we do it in geometry. And also that it is one single specific, infinitely small location on a plane. So you haven't gotten a chance to write these 2 things down. Go ahead, pause the video, do that, and unpause when you are ready to move on. Next thing we want to talk about, if we start at a point and go off forever in a single direction, we call that a ray. And a ray extends forever from a point in one direction. And in order to talk about or write down a ray, we actually need 2 points. We need one point to be what we call the end point, which is where it starts, and one point to be somewhere on the ray so that our ray can go from the end point through the second point. And so the ray that we have up here, up beside the definition, shows only 1 point, but let's draw a second point on it now so we can see it. There we go. And so let's label these points A and B, for example. So we have a ray that has endpoint A and goes through point B. So if we're going to write that down to designate that as a ray without actually having to draw it, then we show a ray by using 2 letters together, starting with the endpoint, which is A, and having the second one, which is B, and then showing that there is only one direction to the ray by starting at the endpoint and drawing a one-sided arrow, A, B. So this section here designates the ray AB. If, for example, we had another ray that went from D to H, we would write it as DH with an arrow going from D to H above it. And that's how we represent rays when we just write them. So go ahead, pause the video, write this down, and move on when you are ready. And finally, the last thing that we're going to talk about in this video is a line. And a line is like a ray in that it has points and it goes through points, but it extends forever, and we mean forever in both directions. So when we draw it, we use these arrows, like we did in the ray, to show that they go on forever. And much like a ray, a line also needs 2 points. Let's say this goes through point A and point B. And to write that line down, we use points A and B, but draw a double-sided arrow over it. Now in this case, because a line goes forever in every direction, it doesn't matter what order these letters go in. A line can be AB, or a line can be BA. In either case, it represents the same line. Now you'll notice in these definitions, something that we didn't talk about is a segment. We've already talked about segments in class, and we'll talk a little bit more about those segments in class. But they're not going to be a part of this video, so go ahead, pause the video if you haven't written these down yet, and go ahead and write these down, and come back when you're ready to move on to the last part. So no particular problems to work on here, just to review that we have 4 important definitions in geometry that we wanted to go through in this video. The first is the idea of a plane, and a plane is just a flat surface that extends forever in all directions, not just 1, 2, 3, 4, but every direction. Within planes lie points that are designated by a single capital letter, those single specific locations in on a plane or in space. If we start at a point and move forever in one direction, as shown by that arrow, then we have what's called a ray. To draw a ray, we simply have an arrow with only one head on it. To show that something is a ray by just using the letters, we start at the end point, go to the other point that the ray goes through, and then a one-sided arrow above those 2 letters. And if it, in fact, extends forever in both directions, we call it a line. So those are your basic notations and definitions that we will use in this geometry unit.